Hey everyone, how is it going? It has been a hot minute since I made a video. I kind of dropped off the side of the world, at least in terms of making booktube videos, right around September, right around when Shakestember, the annual celebration of Shakespeare that I host with a couple of other booktubers, was supposed to take place. And if I went in depth about why I disappeared like that, this video would turn out to be 2 hours long or something like that. But I'll try to summarize it briefly and just say that last year turned out to be a really tumultuous year for me for a few reasons. And again, I'm not going to go into specifics, but there were just a few reasons that last year turned out to be absolutely crazy for me in terms of my personal life. There was a period during the year where I was barely reading because I was so deeply depressed. I had a horrible semester in school, and I had some other things go on that just really took away my energy for BookTube, and for a lot of things, but the thing that gave was BookTube. And so that, in a very vague nutshell, is why I haven't been here. But I feel like at this point, I owe you all at least a top reads of 2022 video. I usually do these at some point, and this one will be a bit different from other years. There are just some reads on the list that are a bit different than what tend to be on previous lists like this from me. But first, I thought I would begin with a book that I actually reread this year. So a book I did not read for the first time, but reread this year, and that is *The Little Prince* by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So I read this a few years ago and really enjoyed it, but didn't adore it the way a lot of people really adore it. And so then I set it aside and just sort of forgot about it for a few years. And then this year, when I got horribly depressed at one of my lowest points, I thought about the story from this book, and I thought it would be a good story for me to revisit. And so I decided to reread this, and this was one of the first books I read after maybe a month or two of not reading a thing. And it was such a profound experience, a profound and moving experience, rereading this when I was in such a low place. It gave me a lot of consolation, I suppose, not exactly comfort, but consolation. In particular, regarding just its general message. And I won't say that after reading it, I wasn't depressed anymore, but I think I did feel slightly less crappy after reading it, and I don't think I have felt quite as crappy since reading it as I did before I read it. So there's that. And it's certainly a book that I will revisit in the future and probably recommend to many people in the future. So I thought I would start with a really special reread this year. Okay, now moving on to books that I have read for the first time. And the first two of these will be not surprising at all to anyone who followed my channel for the first half of the year, because I made multiple videos about both of the first two entries on my list. The first of those is Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman, which is a historical novel with a huge cast of characters that takes place on the Eastern Front during World War II, focusing a lot on Russian and especially Jewish Russian individuals on the Eastern Front. There are some Ukrainian characters, there are some German characters as well, but the focus is on sort of the experience of Russians and Ukrainians during the Second World War. And it has that historical fiction element to it, but it's also about a lot of other things. You know, with a title like Life and Fate, you have to assume that it has much more universal themes, and it certainly does. And I can't go into all of them, but I think the aspect of the book that will stick with me the most in my life is the message that the book has about hope in really dark times, but also just at any time. And its message about hope, I think, is extremely unconventional because it doesn't really offer very much room for good actually winning out over evil, so to speak. But it does assert that as long as there is a little bit of good in the world, then the overwhelming evil that we see cannot win. That's kind of the message of hope it has, which does not seem very comforting, but in the context of the book and the context of what's gone on in my own life and in the world in general, I think is really an important message, I think. And so this is a great book. I will leave a link to the videos that I made about it if you're curious to check out more of my thoughts. I certainly like The Little Prince, will revisit it, although it will probably be not for a while because, as you can see, it is rather long. But great read. I'll leave a link to my videos. And the next book, again, will not be a surprise. And this is a Icelandic saga, which I read in this bind-up of the Sagas of the Icelanders, put out by Penguin Classics. And this is Egils saga, which is an Icelandic saga about a guy named Egil. I read it as a part of Saga, which is an event that I used to host, which with several other people, where we read Icelandic sagas or literature that's adjacent to the Icelandic sagas. And I've actually stepped down as a host of Saga for this year. But I made three or four videos about Egil saga. And it turned out to be such a wonderful reading experience. This guy, Egil, who is the central character of the saga, is such a fascinating character. You see him go on this really long journey from this violent, vicious, cruel man to, at the end of the saga and at the end of his life, being much wiser and calmer. Not exactly sympathetic, but certainly wiser. And that is such a fascinating journey to see. And there are a lot of twists and turns in the plot of Egil saga, but it is a great work. It was a great read. I made several videos about it, and I'll leave links to those. But I have such a weakness for stories that start at the beginning of someone's life and go all the way to the end of their life. I find stories like that so interesting. And this is certainly one of my favorite that I have read. So I really loved Egil saga. So there's that. Next entry in my top reads is a bit unconventional, because really what this is kind of a placeholder for an author more than it is a individual work by the author. But I want to include the lengthy-ish poem by William Blake called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell as an entry in my top reads of 2022. So for those not familiar with William Blake's work, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is a 15-page, mostly prose poem that he wrote. And a big theme of this poem is the conflict between passion and reason, which William Blake kind of saw as kind of the quintessential conflict in Western thought, and in particular Western religious thought. And he felt like the predominance of reason over passion was an extremely big problem in Western life and Western thought. And so this poem is kind of about that. And that had such a profound impact on me. And I think it may even have played a role in some of the events that took place this year. Again, I don't want to go into specifics, but I think it really did have a even more profound effect on me than I at first realized. I reread the poem this morning in preparation for this video and was just struck by it all over again, just how much it resonated with how I felt this year and everything that I've gone through. So it is certainly one of William Blake's most important works. I'm not the only person to say that, but I think it ended up being one of my top reads of the year for a very sort of personal reason. And there are other works in here that I got to that I could have included. I wanted to read this entire complete poems of William Blake in 2022. I did not get there. Got about halfway through the book. And I got all the way through Vala or the Four Zoas, which is one of his like big, sprawling, philosophical epics. And that one was really cool too. But I think The Marriage of Heaven and Hell was the standout for me, and it's probably the work by William Blake that I will revisit the most, possibly only rivaled by The Songs of Innocence and Experience. But really, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is just a stand-in for William Blake as an author for me, because he was kind of a white whale for me in terms of poets who I wanted to explore, but spent so much time just nervous to explore their work, because he is very intimidating. He's very dense. He's difficult. He's not easy. Once you start to get into his world, learn his shtick, he becomes much easier. But he is intimidating, and I made the plunge, got into his work last year, and started to really fall in love with him. So, anyway, Marriage of Heaven and Hell by William Blake. Okay, so now I have 4 more books, and they're all books that I read after I kind of fell off the side of the world in terms of BookTube. So they'll all be books that probably I've never held up on my channel before. But the next 2 I want to talk about as kind of a pair. And the first of these is Love Speaks Its Name, Gay and Lesbian Love Poems, which is edited by J.D. McClatchy and is published as a part of this Everyman's Library Pocket Poets series, which I just love these editions so much. They're so cute. And so this is an anthology of basically same-sex love poems. You know, it says gay and lesbian love poems, but some of the authors included are bisexual as well. And includes authors from all throughout history. They're largely focused on Western authors, but they're from all throughout history. So you have everything from Sappho in ancient Greece to Virgil in ancient Rome to A.E. Housman to Elizabeth Bishop to James Merrill. Shakespeare is in there, naturally, and many others. And the other collection that I want to talk about, and I'm talking about them in tandem because it's another collection of love poems, is just this anthology called 4 Centuries of Great Love Poems, which is compiled by Debra Starr, which is probably a lot more basic than this one, because, you know, it includes the usual suspects when it comes to love poems. You know, Shakespeare, Sir Philip Sidney, Robert Herrick, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and so on. So probably a bit more of a basic selection, but I'm including these 2 as a pair because one big theme in my reading this year is really finding a whole new relationship with love poems. I probably have said on my channel before at some point, but I'll say it again, that for a long time, love poems just didn't do very much for me. At least I didn't seek them out very much. But this past year, I started to basically not be able to get enough of love poetry. I basically want to read nothing but love poetry at this point in terms of reading poetry. I mean, I do want to read other prose things, but in terms of my reading poetry, my main focus is on love poems. And these 2 anthologies were huge for me in realizing that. And they both included poems that have become favorites and I'm sure will stay favorites. And I've even discovered new authors through them. For example, in the Love Speaks Its Name, I discovered Constantine Cavafy, who I had never read before. I had heard his name, but never read him, and I desperately want to read more of him. In 4 Centuries of Great Love Poems, I also discovered other authors who I want to explore. So these were both great, and again, they cater very much to my personal journey through the year, so that's kind of why they're here. But also, they're good anthologies. I mean, I would recommend them. This one is a bit more obscure. This one has very few people who've marked it as read on Goodreads, so I'm not sure even where you would find this if you want to read it. But this one, obviously, is by a major publisher, so you can find this one if you want to. Okay, moving into my last 2, which I will talk about separately. So the first of these feels like a bit of a cheat. It doesn't even necessarily feel like a book, but this is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. And And this is just a story about a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse who walk around the woods together and just talk about sort of life, the universe, and everything, I suppose. But really, it's more a collection of very, very short aphorisms paired with some really lovely artwork. I think rather lovely artwork, some lovely sort of minimalist artwork. Hopefully you're actually seeing this, I'm not sure. But I really love the artwork in this. Again, very minimalist. And for me, very moving the way that it's done. And the sentiments expressed in it were just really, again, I think important for me in terms of, again, my personal journey this year. But I think could be really effective for anyone at any point in their life. You know, like this is just one example. So one quote, this is the mole talking to the boy. He says, "One of our greatest freedoms is how we react to things," right? Just little aphorisms like that. That's really what it is. There is sort of a loose plot in the book, but mostly, just look at that. I love artwork like that. But mostly it's just a collection of aphorisms, really, and it is a very wise book, I think. So anyway, I wanted to include that. And then the last book that I wanted to talk about is maybe a bit of a cheat because I actually finished it in 2023, but I read like 80% of it in 2022, and it feels like it sticks a lot with the themes of my reading in 2022, so I'm just including it in my best reads of 2022 here. And that is At Swim, Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill, which is another big historical novel, incidentally, which takes place in 1915, 1916 Ireland, and is about two boys, Jim Mack and Doyler Doyle, who fall in love. Doyler starts to teach Jim how to swim, actually, and that's how they kind of strike up their friendship, which eventually becomes more than a friendship. And the plot kind of moves forward from there. These two boys sort of explore their sexuality together and fall in love. And it also deals to a degree with the kind of abortive 1916 Easter uprising, which some people, I'm certain, who are watching will know of. But that is kind of peripheral to this love story between these two boys. And to a degree, it's also a story of a love triangle, because there was a third guy who's involved with both of the boys. But it's just a beautiful love story. It's extremely sad. I was really sad at the ending, but it is beautiful. It really resonated with me, this story of these two boys just tentatively, diving into their relationship, so to speak, speaking of swimming. And it's just great. So I don't know really what else to say other than that. If you're interested in queer literature, definitely read it. So those are my top reads of 2022. I'm really pleased that I got this video done in one take because I don't know if I have the energy for editing. But anyway, if you've read any of these and want to let me know your thoughts, please do let me know in the comments. And I will leave it at that. So I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.